Good morning and welcome to Bible Appetizers. The purpose of this Bible study is to whet your appetite for the Word of God. My name is Reverend Tony Robinson, and today we will begin with Genesis chapter 15. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your Word. Open our minds that we may receive it and become more and more what you want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. Genesis chapter 15 begins as follows. All right, we're reading from Genesis 15, and we're reading from the New International Version of the Bible. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Now, it's interesting how Abram responded to God. God comes to Abraham and he says to him, he takes to him in a dream, says to him, I'm your everything. I'm everything you need. I'm your great, I am your shield, your very great reward. You know, as children of Abraham, God is our shield also, and our great reward. Now Abraham says, okay, well, if you are my shield and my great reward, I don't have what I want. What can you give me since I remain childless? And it's interesting how he asked that question. He didn't just ask God for a child. He just said, I'm your great, you're my great reward, you're my shield, but you don't give me any children. What's up with that? And then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir. So in those days, if he died and had no children, he had no heirs, male heirs. You know, again, everything was focused on the man, and if there were no men in his family, then a servant would inherit the whole estate. So, again, back then, the focus was on the man. The man's the head, and so there's always a man in charge. So Abraham said, look, you haven't given me any children. I mean, everybody else around me have children, and in those days, that was the pride. That was the pride of everybody, to have children. The Lord said, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. All right, so Abram is getting old and no children yet. And he's kind of getting discouraged. And he said, you brought me out here, you made promises to me, but I'm not seeing anything. Have you ever been in a situation like that where you have prayed and you have asked God for something, and the answer is delayed in coming? I know how it is. Been there. I started to ask for a wife, and I started to seek the Lord earnestly for a wife. But it didn't come for 5 years. My wife didn't show up in my life for 5 years. Once she showed up, within a year, we were married. But the 5-year period was a refinement period. That was a period that was getting me ready for the wife that God would give me. He changed my heart, he changed my attitude, he prepared me for the wife that he gave me. So I'm going to give you a quality woman, but you got to know how to treat her. You have to know how to treat her. And so by the time my wife showed up, I was better prepared to be a husband than when I started asking for the Lord. So sometimes the Lord delays his responses, not because he wants to hurt us, but because we need to be prepared for the response that he's going to give us. Then he again, remember, he had appeared to Abraham years before and promised him that he would be the father of a great nation. He's going to be a blessing, and God was going to bless those that bless him and curse those that curse him, and he would be a blessing. The whole world will be blessed through him. Here he is, umpteen years later, and nothing's happened. God comes back and says, look, I haven't forgotten my promise. I am all that you need. All right, so goes out there and he points out, look at the sky. Look at the sky. Can you count them? Can you count the stars? No. That's the way your offspring are going to be. God is a big thinker, but when you have big plans, sometimes it takes big time to get the big plans. All right. So God promised Abraham that his offspring will be as countless as the stars in the sky. And the Bible, verse 6 says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. God made a promise, Abraham believed, and God credited Abraham's faith in his promise as righteousness. How do we attain righteousness? We believe God. Very simple. We believe God and we take him at his word. We place our faith in him, we take him at his word, and we act accordingly. Verse 7, he also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. Abraham was not in possession of the land, but God says, I'm giving you all this land. I brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans. I brought you here. I'm giving you this land. So, talk about big dream. That's a big dream. But Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I would possess it? I would take possession. I would gain possession of it. So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Now, when God gives you instructions, you follow the instructions to the letter. All right? Abraham wants to know, okay, Lord, you made this promise to me. How am I going to know that this is going to happen? Because, you made this promise to me way back when I left my home in the Ur of the Chaldeans. I'm here and nothing's happened. God doesn't mind us questioning. Okay, because he understands that we're limited. We don't know. We don't understand this. He was getting to know God. And see, all that time in between, God is building faith. Because later on, after Abraham has gone through this and he's had his child and everything like that, he knows that if God makes a promise, God's going to keep the promise, no matter how long it takes for that promise to be fulfilled. Sometimes the Lord allows us to suffer just a little bit longer so that when he gives us the solution, we know that even if we're suffering, if God has made a commitment and a promise to us, he will fulfill his promise. So it gives us patience. Suffering gives us patience. Suffering is a part of the mix, folks. There is no way to get around suffering because there are lessons. There's wisdom in suffering. Okay, so even if you do everything God tells you to do to the letter, there's going to be some suffering in your life because God allows us to go through suffering so we build up our faith and we learn how to wait on God. Because at the end of the day, God's timing is always better than ours. So God said, okay, I want you to get these things for me. So imagine Abram and God talking to each other, God talking to Abram. And then Abram gets up and goes and does these crazy things. And anybody watching him would think he's nuts. When you deal with God, Sometimes the world is going to think that you are out of your mind. All right? But that's okay. You have to decide who you're going to listen to. Are you going to listen to the scoffers, or are you going to listen to the Lord? Verse 10, Abram brought all these things. So you imagine he's walking around, he gets all these things, and he brings them together. And I can imagine Sarah looking out the side of the tent and saying, what is he doing? Because God is still talking to Abram. He's not talking to Sarah. I know my wife would be out there like, Tony, what are you doing? Well, the Lord told me to get these things together, so I'm getting them together. Why? Honey, don't ask. I'm dealing with the Lord. I'm just going to do what he tells me to do. All right. Abram bought all these things, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite to each other. So, check it out. He brings a heifer, a goat, a ram, 3 years old, along with a dove and a pigeon. Get all these animals, slay them, cut them in half, and arrange them in halves opposite each other. The birds, however, did not cut in half. Just the big one, the big animal. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. Okay? I can imagine the vultures like, wow, dinner. No. Get away from here. Because we're dealing with God now. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep. So here he is again waiting on the Lord. He obeyed God, got the animals, cut them in two, have the bird and the pigeon there. Isn't it strange what God tells you to do? Sometimes the things that God tells you to do are kind of wacky. But we're the ones that are wacky. God is never wacky. All right? So Abram's sitting there now by these animals, shooing away the birds of prey and waiting for God. And he's sitting waiting for God. He falls into a deep sleep. He said that a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. When he felt God's presence. When you feel God's presence, you automatically feel a sense of awe, a sense of unworthiness that came over him like a cloud. That sense of unworthiness. Then God said to him, know for certain, that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. God is telling him ahead of time, not only are you going to have descendants, but they're going to be enslaved for 400 years. My God. Why would you do that, Lord? Your ways are not my ways, and your thoughts are not my thoughts. As the heaven is high above the earth, so are my ways above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts. Why do they have to go again? Suffering. Martin Luther King said, undeserved suffering is redemptive. God is going to show himself not just to Abram and his descendants, but to the world. God is laying out the plan so that people can see that God is in charge. No matter how ugly it looks, God is in charge. Okay? And so in that, again, I told you, suffering is a major part of God's plan. Because in suffering, we discover the power of God. We discover who God is. And we discover what God can do. Okay? So this was not just for Abram's consumption or for his children's consumption. This is for the whole world. So God had a world view, while Abram was only getting a view of himself and his family. He said, so they're going to be mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possession. When you go through the sufferings that you have to go through, God's going to bring you out on the end and reward you. So, to all my black brothers and sisters that have gone through a lot of oppression and a lot of injustice in the United States of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, just know that God, that undeserved injustice is redemptive. And at the end, we're going to come out better off. We're going to come out with great possessions. We're going to come out better off than we would have been had we not gone through this. Nothing happens in our lives that God doesn't know about. I wrote a song, and in the song I said there's nothing in my life that you're not aware of. There's nothing in my life that you can't take care of. But your spirit gives me comfort in the middle of the storm. So I keep pressing on in spite of circumstances. With you, Jesus, I will take my chances. And the sorrow won't compare with all the joy that I will share when I press on. When I press on. So I'll squirm a little, and I'll hurt a little, and I'll let them drag my name through the dirt a little, and I'll fuss a little, and I'll fume a little, but press on. And I'll sigh a little, and I cry a little, and each passing day I guess I'll die a little, but I'll grow a little, and I'll learn a little, and press on, because you're going to turn the tide in my favor if I press on. That's my little song. Anyway, it says, I will punish the nation where they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. So all the possession of the land is not just in your lifetime, but into the future. Okay? I'm going to bring you on home before all of this is done, but I want you to know that it's a done deal. I have spoken, and I've given this to you. All right? So, in the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. So, God gave that land to Israel not because He wanted to just displace one people, but He said the sin of the Amorites, the people that were in the land, was great. And He said, I'm going to let it go on for another 400 years. And when it gets to its full measure, then I'm going to wipe them out. That's what He told him. That's what He told Abraham. So it wasn't that God was just being unfair to the people in the land. The people in the land were so wicked that God had decided, you know what, they're not going to change. So when their wickedness has reached its peak, then I'm gonna bring Abraham's descendants back into this land. I'm going to wipe those people off the face of the earth. And later on, you'll see that God told them when they came into Canaan to possess the land, God told them, wipe everybody out, because the sin of that nation had reached its peak. Okay? When the sun had set and fallen and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. That's the covenant. The covenant between God and Abraham was, I'm going to give you this land, the land of all these people, because all of these people were evil. Okay? Now, we're moving on to chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Sarai gets impatient, and she comes up with her own plan. See, and it's understandable. Again, I mean, they had no history in dealing with God. This is the first time they're dealing with God. God's talking to Abram, but God's not talking to her. And so Sarah's like, I understand all the stuff that God's dealing with you, but he ain't talking to me, and I ain't got no children. I need children. So now take my maid and go sleep with her and get me a child. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. And that's interesting too. Again, God made these promises to Abram. But again, God takes long sometimes in delivering the promise, because God has bigger plans for us than we have for ourselves. I can imagine Abram saying, "You sure, honey? You're absolutely sure now, darling?" Yeah, I'm sure. Go get with her. I need a child. I'm done waiting. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, again, God made this promise to him, 10 years have gone by. Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. Okay? There were no limits. In those days, people had more than one wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. You know how it is. Got catty. You're the boss, but I'm the baby mama. And Sarai said to Abram, "It's your fault." So Sarai had the idea. Now the woman gets pregnant. Now she disrespects Sarai. And then she comes to Abraham. Sarai says to Abraham, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." What are you talking about, Sarah? I asked you if you were sure, and you said you were. It was not my idea to get with Hagar. It was your idea. But you know what? When the wife gets like this, happy wife, happy life. Abraham said, "Your slave is in your hands." Abraham said, "Do with her whatever you think is best." What you want me to do? She's your servant. Do whatever you want with her. Then Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. She mistreated her so much that Hagar left the house, big as a house, pregnant. God did not select perfect people. God selected people. And he brought his holiness to those people and began to teach these people about his holiness. They were not perfect. Abram hadn't learned this lesson about waiting yet. Okay? God came to him from the early Chaldeans, big period of time passed. Made a promise to him 10 years ago. Then 10 years passed, you're like, man, when? Okay? Wife says, "I want a child. I don't care. I don't care what God says. I want a child." But sometimes when we don't care what God says, it brings trouble on our heads. So now we got a problem. Okay? How am I doing on time? I'm 24 minutes. Okay. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It had been so bad that this girl ran away out in the desert, no place to go. So Sarai was mean. But then again, this girl brought it on herself by disrespecting her mistress. She forgot where her place was. It was a spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? This is the angel of the Lord meets Hagar out in the desert. She said, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. You want to avoid being mistreated? Submission is the word. Submission is the word. Sometimes you have to put up with stuff until you don't have to put up with it any longer. God told her, go on back. You can't stay out here. Go on back and submit to her. And the angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So now, whose idea was it to introduce Hagar's descendants into the picture? That was God's decision. Remember. Okay, let's read a little further. I'm going to increase your descendants. Why? Because that child belongs to Abram. And I told Abram I was going to bless the whole world through him. So you're carrying his child. I'm going to increase your descendants. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. So even though God was dealing with the main people, Abram and Sarai, God still had mercy and compassion on Hagar, who was not part of the promise or anything like that. But God has a love for people, period. He says, you will name him Ishmael. It says, he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. The descendants of Ishmael will be crazy people. And they're going to be fighting with everybody. And don't you know it? The descendants of Ishmael to this day are fighting against their brothers. Middle East is hot and smoldering with stuff going on. Why? It's the descendants of Ishmael. And we'll see that later on. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are God, you are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So she named the well, the place where she was, she named it, You are the God who sees me. Because she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. They knew that they could not look upon God and die. And live. They all had that belief. But the Lord appeared, and this is one of these, what we call a Christophany. Because remember, the physical appearance of God is in Jesus Christ. And so if people have seen the Lord, they have seen a pre-incarnate view of Jesus Christ. Okay? So, she named that place, gave it a name so that she'd never forget. And people and no one will ever forget about that. That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. All right. So Hagar bore Abram a son, And Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. 86 years old. But remember, people lived long lives back in those days. All right. I'm not quite at 30 minutes, but I think I'm going to stop here. This is the end of chapter 16. And so now, again, here is God injecting suffering into the picture. Because he's telling Hagar, you're going to have a child, and he's going to be a jackass. He's going to be fighting with everybody. Why would he do that? Because you know what? We don't seek God unless we're in trouble. So God interjects some trouble into our history, into our lives, so that we would realize that it's not all about us. We need him. We need him. So go back again. God tells Abram, your descendants are going to be slaves in slavery for 400 years, and they're going to be mistreated for 400 years. What happens when you are mistreated for 400 years? You get poor in spirit. Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When you are suffering, you are beyond, you run out of yourself, of self-reliance, and now you need God. And when you do, you become poor in spirit. You recognize your need for God, then you seek God. I wish it were different, but it's not. You think about it. Anybody who is successful and everything, they don't determine that they have a need for God until they're stripped of all the stuff that they have, and they realize that without God, they're nothing. They are bankrupt. So now we have conflict interjected into the life of Abram and his descendants. All right. So God bless you, and we will meet again at the beginning of chapter 17.